Finance today has a terrible name. We see attacks on the world of Wall Street and discussion about corrupt financiers and great inequality that finance has brought about. And so there's a sense that if we could just manage to live without it, we'd all be happier. And the thesis of this book is that that's not true, that complex society, civilization, is something that's been built on complicated financial tools. And if we go all the way back to the origins of these complex societies, all the way back to ancient Near East and ancient China, what you see is in order to live in a society with a lot of people together, in urban society, and in order to have a world where we can plan so that everybody has enough to eat, you have to have financial tools. And so the story of the book is a story of how these financial tools developed right alongside many of the features of civilization that we know. Civilization is built on culture, but it's actually something quite different. You can sort of think about civilization as a moment when cultures get so intense and people live very closely together, and they start to do very different things. And so the real distinction between culture and civilization in this book is cultures are sometimes insular. They don't need such complex tools as stocks and bonds and contracts and courts to adjudicate commercial disputes. But civilizations really rely on those because they're much more open. And by open, I mean they reach out geographically and they learn about the world around them. They do so mostly through trade. They have foreigners that come into cities and they go out of cities. And they have to have a way of dealing with change and novelty and long-distance relationships. But also they need a way to deal with very immediate, close relationships amongst people that don't necessarily know each other very well. They may and come from different cultures and societies. And so finance provides a technology for both of those two things. When cultures get complex enough and intensified enough that they need to open up and reach out and become, in some sense, global beings, finance is one of the tools that they use to do that. Finance is a tool that moves value back and forth through time. So I like to think about it as a time machine where you can't move yourself through time, but you can move your money through time. And the way that happens is that somebody makes a promise to pay something in the future. That simple loan is something that transcends the immediate world we live in and forces us to imagine a world in the future and to think about how we would enforce such a promise and to consider a relationship between two people as something that extends through time. Those are kind of heady concepts, but the fundamental function of finance is to smooth or manage the relationship that people have with time, at least in an economic sense. The second really big function of finance is to manage risk. We all have risks that we face, and finance is a way to establish protection against those risks, or if you're a speculator, to provide protection against those risks in return for rewards. So insurance companies are financial institutions because they manage this risk. And families actually are financial institutions insofar as you can think about successive generations as providing a risk protection to people as they get old. So those basic functions, providing for the future or moving money to the present so you could invest it today in some worthwhile enterprise, and mitigating risks that people share. Those are two really key functions of finance. In ancient Mesopotamia, when you had a contract with somebody, you had to write it down, but there was no paper. So the contracts were written on clay, and those clay contracts exist to this day. So the ancient Near East, in these cities, you will find cuneiform tablets or tablets written on clay. It looks about the size of a bar of soap, but if you look on it, you will see that there are lines, and those lines have signatures, names of people, attesting to the validity of a contract. So just in the way today that when we buy or sell a piece of land, there will be a witness. These are the witnesses to a transfer, a deed for a piece of land in an ancient Mesopotamian city. One of the first and most exciting financial contracts that exists is a contract that was written about 2400 BCE in the period of the Sumerian Empire. And it's a contract that's a dispute between two cities. And one city reconquers a piece of land from another city and then puts a huge debt on them, war reparations. The way that debt is calculated uses compound interest. So it uses a very mathematical technique to accrue a debt over 2 or 3 generations, and the winning ruler presents this debt to the losing city, and it's worth something like 3 trillion bushels of wheat. So it's an absurd number. It's an imaginary number, but it's a way of expressing a legal obligation in the language of finance, in a mathematics that can take care of enormous numbers, and in a framework that already by 4,400 years ago was understood as a frame of reference and understanding about the relationship between peoples and also between cities. One of the high points in the book is a period in the early 1700s when the countries of France and England and Holland, actually countries all over the European continent, got excited about stocks. And it was the beginning of a global stock market that the ordinary person could invest in a way that they couldn't really before. And so we think of the tech bubble of the 1990s as a period that brought a lot of people into the stock market and got them speculating, got them all excited and feverish about whether they're going to become millionaires. The same thing happened in 1720 in the cities of London and Amsterdam and Paris. One of the interesting things that comes out of the first financial bubble, which happened in 1720, is a list of the kinds of companies that people were investing in. And the list is funny because it's very much like the kinds of lists that we see from the tech bubble in the 1990s. And I have a document that I used in some research because it had details of these companies. And I'll show it to you. It's called The Bubbler's Mirror, because it's a satirical print that was made right after the stock market bubble of 1720 in London as a way of making fun at all the financiers and all the people that threw good money after bad. And so what's interesting about it is that there's a central figure who is sad and is holding a purse that doesn't have any coins in it. So here's somebody that lost their money in the stock market. And along the border of this print are the list of all the kinds of companies that were launched at this time. So here's a company that for bleaching hair. And there's even a company that's the precursor to hedge funds. It's called Wesley's Actions, and Actions were the name for stocks at that time. What I got excited about when I started to look at this document is even down in the very fine print you see companies, and one of the companies that was launched at this time was a company for a flying machine. So Whether it was a prototype flying machine, whether it was a machine that really could carry people, who knows? But somebody was raising money for an airship in 1720. The thesis of the book is that finance is an essential part of our society, whether we like it or not, and that finance has also changed the way we think. Financial thinking for many people, well, for me, is actually kind of difficult to do. You have to orient your mind towards quantifying things in a way that is not a natural process. So what finance seems to have done through time is caused us to grow a part of ourselves that may not be entirely comfortable, which is the analytical part of our minds. And then to develop tools, arithmetic, complicated expressions like logarithms and discounting of time and so forth, in order to use these tools. Finance is not essential to their day-to-day lives. It becomes really important when you start thinking about what you're going to do in the future. I don't like to think about my savings every day, and I don't like to calculate how much money I'm going to have at retirement, but every once in a while it's something you have to do. And if you didn't have finance, you wouldn't be able to save for the future. We wouldn't have pension funds. We wouldn't have 401ks. And we wouldn't be able to make this trade-off between how much we need to save now in order to be able to provide for ourselves in the future. So we really need it. And the place we need it is in this long-term planning for our collective financial future.